Hey everyone, Adam here from Pink Parsnip Computers, and today in this how-to video I'm going to talk you through how to wire an ARGB fan controller. We obviously do a lot of the builds here in-house, but what is a very regular occurrence is people doing their own self-builds for the first time is putting together their PC, and if you don't have an addressable RGB header on your motherboard, which is a 3-pin, not a 4-pin, a 3-pin 5-volt addressable RGB header, then a ARGB controller can be a really popular device to control and let you have ARGB devices. And a controller ultimately means that you can use that device, a controller, to change your lighting patterns. It can also be used though in conjunction with an addressable RGB header on your motherboard. And that can be really helpful because if you're running, say, 9 fans or 10 fans or 10 addressable RGB devices, you don't really want to connect all 9 of those into one single header because there's not going to be enough power, and you end up with flickering devices and lower brightness on the lights, in which case a controller can be a really good thing to use. And I've got a myriad of ones here, but I'm going to show you what I believe are the most common and what they do. So this is the most basic of ARGB controllers. It plugs into a SATA power connector off your power supply, and then it provides one 3-pin addressable RGB header. And you could plug any 3-pin addressable device onto that, whether it be a fan, whether it be an RGB light strip, an AIO cooler or tower cooler, and that would provide you power to that addressable RGB. Now this is a very basic controller. In fact, you can buy these online, but they quite often will come free of charge with quite a few devices. And if you do use one of these, there is a little button built in here, and you press that, it will change the lighting pattern of whatever you've connected to this. And if you had fans that have, for example, like these fans here, and these are brand new fans, let me just unplug that so that they're all not knotted together. This is just a typical 120mm addressable RGB fan, and on this it has 2 connectors. It has a PWM connector, which would go to a fan header, and that gives power to the fan so it spins, but it also sends a signal to the motherboard to allow you to adjust the speed of the fan. But then you also have this, which is an addressable 3-pin RGB connector, and it is the female variant because it's got the 3 holes on it, but some of them quite often will have this, which is a daisy chain off that connector, which allows you to plug another RGB device onto this to give RGB. So for example, if you were to take this connection, plug it into this very basic header, bear with me a second, make sure you get the pins the right way around. The arrow, by the way, is where the 2 holes are, if that helps. Always like that. Plug that in. If I gave that power now, that would give me RGB lighting to this fan. It wouldn't give power to the fan because the fan requires a PWM header to get fan, but it would give RGB lighting. If I then connected another fan to this daisy chain element, that would then provide RGB to the secondary fan, and so on and so forth. There are limits to how many devices you can daisy chain though. It does massively depend on the number of LEDs and what the device is. So for example, strimmer cables, some of them have up to like 120 LEDs. Quite often they actually like to be ran completely on their own header, or they actually do require something like this to give them subsequent power, because I know with some of the Asia Horse ones, for example, and other manufacturers, they really do suck power. You can't even run 2 of them on the same controller. So that is a very simple ARGB controller. You then have another variant of something like that, which is this. Looks identical, but with one key difference. It also has this lead, and inside this lead are 2 pins. And with those 2 pins, you can connect the header cable from your reset switch or an LED light or an RGB light button on your case, which allows you to effectively mimic pressing the button that we did on the other one from pressing a physical button on your case. Apart from that, it's identical. That's the main negative with these is, of course, you can only ever change the lighting colors by pressing this button. And this button is almost certainly going to be inside your PC case. So not ideal if you want to be changing your lighting effects. This is a little bit better. Then you get up into what I would call more conventional RGB controllers. I'm going to rotate my camera a bit. I'm kind of bending my neck a little bit. There we go. That's a bit better. There we go. That's a bit better. You can see me a bit more. I mean, I might show the devices. So, more conventional controllers. You've got a very, very basic one like this. This is the kind of one that you could probably pick up for very, very cheap, or maybe pre-installed in a budget to entry kind of gaming PC. And you'll see on it, there's no housing or casing, first of all. It is very, very basic, and they normally come with like a sticker rubber pad on the back, this little 3M foam strip that you'd stick against anywhere in your case that there is available room. Quite often it's near the hard drive bay or something like that. And you can see at the top, we've got 6 3-pin connectors. They are addressable RGB connectors. And at the bottom, we've got 6 PWM connectors. And they are for the PWM leads of your case fans. So these will ultimately allow power to go to the case fans, and these will allow power and control to go to the ARGB devices. If you look around this a little bit more, you've got one cable coming out of this particular controller, and that is an addressable RGB header cable. So if you connect that to your motherboard, then that actually allows you, using software like Signal RGB or the software from your actual motherboard vendor, to send a signal from your motherboard to this controller to tell it what it wants the fans to do. You know, green, black, whatever. Not black, you wouldn't have it on black. Green, pink, lighting effects, whatever. And then this lead goes into a SATA connection to give power to this controller. Now, there's one other connection on this, which is just here, which is 2 pins, and it works in the same way as the 2 pins I showed you on the previous thing. You would plug your header cable from your reset switch or your LED button or your RGB button if you have one, but you will almost certainly have a reset switch, into this, not into the motherboard. So when you press that reset switch, it will adjust the lighting effects. Well, of course, if you've got it connected to an addressable RGB header on your motherboard, then you won't really be using that reset switch because you'll be using your software. However, you probably still want to wire it in, because one of the common things that happens when you use an ARGB controller is, depending on the actual controller itself, when you power it on, by default, it will want to take control of the RGB lighting effects. And that means you're pressing the reset switch or remote control if it has one to change the lighting. But if you want to control it via the motherboard, you ultimately need to bypass that function to allow the motherboard to send that communication. And the easiest way to do that is, if you wire in a header cable, you can then hold down that button that you chose, like the reset button, normally 5 seconds, and it'll effectively turn off the control of this device, allowing you to send a signal through your motherboard. The only negative with a device like this, these very basic ones, is there is no built-in memory to this. So if you don't have an addressable RGB header and you're going to be using this device to ultimately set the colors of your RGB devices, then every time you fully power down your PC and then power it back on, it's going to go straight to its default, which will probably be like a rainbow. So if you've taken ages to select the right color pattern, like blue and white or green and white or green and pink or whatever it might be, you're gonna have to cycle that button every time to find the same thing if you shut down your PC on the regular, which can be quite annoying. Whereas if you're using addressable RGB and you're not using this to do the RGB signal, then obviously it's set by software. So when the software kicks in, when Windows is up and running, it will automatically set the profile that you had. So the next level up from that, we're kind of doing this in tiers. We've gone basic, pretty basic, the best entry kind of controller with multiple ports. We're then going on to something like this. Looks incredibly similar inside to what the one we just had, and it has the same connection. So 6 PWM headers on the side, 6 addressable RGBs on there. It is, of course, in a plastic case, and it does have a magnet on the back, not a big 3M strip bit of foam. But importantly, it has 2 connections coming out of it. One of them is an addressable RGB again, which does the same as what the previous one did, and the one prior to that, that if you plug this into your motherboard, you can ultimately control your software via your motherboard, sorry, your lighting via your motherboard. But it also has this, which is a PWM header. And you connect that to an available PWM fan header on your motherboard. Not your CPU one, ideally a system fan one or one of the extra system ones. And although it's only two wires coming out of this rather than 4, those two wires are for the signal from your motherboard to the controller to allow you to adjust the speed of the fans that are plugged into this. It's not providing power. The power is coming from the SATA connection, which is this. So if you get one like this, it allows you to adjust the speed of the fans, which can be really, really helpful. If you have something basic like this, your fans are going to be on 100% all the time, which if you've got 6 fans, can be pretty damn loud. So these can get you, these kind of put you on, but I definitely, if I had an option to buy a controller, I would go for something more like this. Because you've got the ability to adjust your fan speeds. It does, again, have the 2 pins that you can plug in that header cable, so you can bypass that fan controller if you want to, and then use your addressable RGB if you need to, header cable off your motherboard. And then the final option is something like this, and I won't take it out of the box. It's basically a level up from the one I've just shown you. We sell these, we sell these, we sell everything. These are a little bit more money. They're usually in the region of about £10. GameMax make them, Vida make them, quite a few manufacturers, and we stock various ones. 2 big differences. One, it comes with remote control, like this. So if you haven't got an addressable RGB header and you want to adjust your lighting effects, say you're having to physically press the button lots and lots and lots, you can just simply press the color that you want on the remote control. 2, it has a built-in memory chip. So if you do fully power down your PC and you are using this to send the signal to your RGB devices, it will remember the color pattern that you have set them on. Also, it's a big magnet on the back. And finally, a bit random, but it has a light on the casing which replicates what the light on the actual RGB fans or devices are being set to the moment, which is kind of irrelevant because this is going to be living inside your case. They do it in white, they do it in black. But yeah, that is how you would wire them in. And then in terms of connecting to your motherboard, I'm actually just going to grab a motherboard to show you. Okay, so here I have a Gigabyte Aorus motherboard. It's a B450, but it's actually quite handy to show you because Gigabytes are a little bit more confusing than a lot of other manufacturers. A lot of other manufacturers will generally just have a 3-pin addressable RGB header, which will look like, let's spin that round, it'll look like that. Can you see that? If I zoom right in, like this. This one here. Camera does not want to focus, just this one here, okay? But some motherboards, older ones, may also have a 4-pin, including this one. It's down here. This one here. And that is labelled as 12 volt. Now, all the devices I've just shown you are 5 volt, and pretty much every device you have are for 5 volt. So do not plug or try and plug a 5 volt onto that 12 volt header there. So the header you want to go for is an addressable RGB header. Now, on a Gigabyte board is a little bit different. So it'll be labelled as a VDG. But on pretty much every other manufacturer, it won't be labelled as VDG. It'll be say ARGB, and it'll have a 5 volt on it. So what you would do, of course, if you were connecting just one RGB fan, you would just connect that directly into that 3-pin header. However, if you want to run multiple devices, you would connect an ARGB controller. So you would plug this here, into your 3-pin header. And then, if you're using one of the ones that has a PWM fan controller cable on it, like this, that needs to be connected to a fan header. Now, this particular board is very typical of a B450 chipset. It has a PWM header up here, which says CPU fan. You don't want to connect this to the CPU fan, ideally, unless you've only got one header randomly. You want to connect it to any of the other fans headers. So this particular one has also got a system fan header down here on the right, and it also has a system fan header down here at the bottom. So I would connect this to either of the system fans. Then what you want to do either via your BIOS software or via a third-party software like Fan Control, is you want to set up a custom fan curve. Now, the BIOS is easiest, so when you boot into your PC, hammer that delete button, go into the BIOS, and there will be an element in the BIOS that's called Hardware Monitor. And in Hardware Monitor, you can set how these fan headers behave. So, for example, your CPU fan header, you want that ideally on smart control. And ultimately what that means is as the CPU gets hotter, the fan will ramp up. It cools down, it slows down, which is why you don't want all your fans on that, because if the CPU's hot, but the rest of the components are cool, if you've got them all paired together, it means all of them are going to ramp up to like 100% if the CPU's hot. It's not a bad thing, because it means the case will cool better, but it can be very loud. So what you want to do is have your fan controller connected to a different fan header, and then you want to set that also probably on smart control. What you don't want to do is have that on full speed. The other thing is if you've got an AIO, you're going to actually have a pump on your AIO, so it's a liquid cooler, and that pump will also need to be connected to a fan header. That pump will need to run at 100%. So if you've got a layout like this, I would connect the pump to the CPU fan header, and in the BIOS, I would set that header as full speed. I would set your CPU fans to System Fan 2, and I would set your RGB controller to a third header. Worst case scenario, you've only got two headers, pump on the CPU fan, set it in the BIOS to full speed. All the other fans are connected via the controller to the other header and have them on smart control, and then you can set them up. So look guys, I hope that helps. I'm going to post as many videos as I can on this, but of course, on this channel, ask any questions you want and I'll get back to you, or a member of the team will get back to you as soon as we can. Thanks for watching.